Kroger Delivery makes it easy to do your holiday shopping in a jingle. There might be a lot on your to-do list, but thanks to Kroger Delivery, you can get everything you need delivered straight to your door at the same great prices you'd find in store. Our refrigerated trucks always ensure that your groceries arrive fresh. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order of $75 or more and get free delivery with a Boost membership. Restrictions apply. See site for details. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying time is here. That's right. We're talking about Black Christmas for its 50th anniversary on Kill by Kill. Hi there, hey there, ho there. It's your old pal Patrick Hamilton coming to you once again from a very cold sorority house in the depths of Canada. This is the Kill by Kill podcast, where we are dedicated to celebrating the least discussed component of any horror film, the characters. And we're going to unpack all the goriest details of 1974's Black Christmas in the hopes that a sorority sister's untimely end is just the beginning of the jokes we might make at their expense. And as always, there's only one person I trust to know that fellatio is definitely a new phone extension. The one, the only, Gena Radcliffe. How are you doing today, Gena?
I'm glad you brought Barb up immediately, because I was going to make some kind of remark that, positing that I myself am like Barb, but I am not like Barb. I wish that I was. I wish that I had her cool confidence, but I do not.
We could all wish. Is it confident, or is it a little bit of booze that loosens up the social mores and allows you to play hilarious pranks on dumb policemen?
I mean, does it matter?
It really doesn't. He is perhaps amongst the stupidest we've ever covered, and that's saying something. But before, I really don't want to scare you about the police, Gena, but thing is, we are not alone. That's right. We have a special guest. Now, you may know him as a vaunted video essayist from The Unloved, a writer on Movie Notebook and The Village Voice, and author of such books as But God Made Him a Poet, Watching John Ford in the 21st Century, and Cinemaphagy on the psychedelic classic form of Toby Hooper, something I'm incredibly interested in. He is the one, the only Scout Tafoya. How are you doing today, Scout?
I'm doing okay. Thanks so much. I will say this is you got my name right, but I, as always, because I invented the word for which the Toby Hooper book is named, I always have to correct people because how do you know how to pronounce a word that I invented? But it's I always pronounce it with the I don't know if this is a softer or a harder A, but it's cinemophagy is always what I call
cinemophagy. Okay, yes. Well, let's put that. Why don't I do it again? And I'm going to put a hyphen here, and I'm going to put ma with an H at the end of that A. Here we go. Now, I don't want to scare you, Gena, about the police or anything, but we are not alone. That's right. We have a special guest. Now, you may know them as a video essayist from The Unloved, a writer on Movie Notebook and The Village Voice, author of such books as But God Made Him a Poet, Watching John Ford in the 21st Century, and Cinemaphagy. God damn it, I did it again. See, now It's a problem. It's the Kevin Marr syndrome
now it's a bit. This is fine. I don't... Right. I don't mind this staying in. This is now a beloved piece of lore.
Cinemaphagy. Oh my God. It's getting worse.
Cinemophagy
on the psychedelic classic form of Toby Hooper, the one, the only Scout Tafoya. How are you doing today, Scout?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. And I'm listen, I'm a professional writer. No one has ever pegged me as a professional speaker. And yet, for 8.5 years, we've been doing this podcast.
So there you go. It's always the ones we least expect.
Exactly. So, Scout, when was the first time you saw Black Christmas, and what was your reaction to it at the time?
I saw Black Christmas very young. I remember, it was a title that I had heard forever just because, like, my dad loved horror movies, and we would go to VHS rental shops, probably once a week or something like that for most of my childhood. And that's just a great way to expose yourself to the idea that there are a million, dark and adult impulses and titles and ideas that are out there for you to later take advantage of and understand. But in the meantime, they're just these like tantalizingly terrifying options.
Sure, yeah.
All the great VHS box art and stuff like that. So I knew about Black Christmas before I saw it. I probably saw it after Bravo ran their first 100 scariest movie moments countdown. In 2004.
I remember that quite well, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a big deal for a lot of people who do what we do, just because A, we're all list queens, as Pauline Kael once called Andrew Sarris.
Sure.
But B, we just like celebrations of genre stuff. And so they had assembled, a lot of it was just morons. It was like 7 improv comics and the Budweiser twins and, just fucking idiots. It was just like who was around that you could get to sit in front of a camera in a black studio for a minute. And
sure. The VH1 philosophy, if there's a subject, especially get at least 10 people to talk about it.
Exactly. Yes. And this was what, I don't even know if these were like fully minted yet, but this was very much the era that leads into the I Love the 70s stuff, as well as Best Week Ever and things like that, which were also, of course, very foundational in their way to people my age. So they ran that. And the thing that stuck with me is Olivia Hussey saying that when she met Steve Martin, she said that he was effusive, that she had been in one of his favorite movies, and she assumed it was something a little more, above board and tasteful, like Romeo and Juliet. He said, no, it was Black Christmas, and that he had seen it like 27 times or something like that. And, obviously Steve Martin, of course, has wonderful taste,
yes.
Perhaps not as somebody picking projects, but as somebody taking them in. He has a rarefied and practiced sense of the ironic. And so if he's enjoying something, he's broken through the first defense of it, which is the object, and he's found the things beneath and, propelling the object. And, the perversity, I think, must have spoken to him.
I think this has elements that I think surprise maybe younger viewers to it, who understand it's this proto first slasher, depending, or following the form of Psycho and Peeping Tom or whatnot, depending on how you want to line things up. But what I don't think that they anticipate is that it is quite funny. It is a very dark comedy in many, many respects, which it's other sort of toxic masculinity and screwing with the form and how it approaches its practically unseen villain. There's a lot of things that it breaks down, but I don't think a lot of people anticipate the laughs that are inherent here.
Very much.
Probably because they might not fully know Bob Clark's filmography. And while he has a wide array of films to go to, outside of Black Christmas and the film that preceded this, he was primarily known as a comedy director. And so I think it creeps into it. I think it's perverse in a delightful way. And I think it's revelatory in many others. But I don't know that that's not what you sit down to actually watch necessarily, but it is absolutely what you get. Gena, when did you first see Black Christmas?
I was really late to this. I don't think I saw it for the first time in its entirety till about maybe 10 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. Now I knew a lot of the imagery from it. I knew the eye peeking through the crack in the door and the open mouth girl with the plastic bag pulled over her face. I knew the absolutely delightful tagline: "If your skin isn't crawling, it's on too tight."
Right,
which I just like. I don't know what that means, but I like it. And it,
as a piece of copy, though, it's pretty golden. I really do enjoy it.
Yeah, it's up. It really is up there with who will survive and what will be left of them. But yeah, and you're absolutely right that I suspect that this lands well with younger audiences and people who are new to it, because in many ways, unfortunately, a lot of the subject matter is still very relevant today.
Amazingly, it keeps being ahead of its time, primarily because over the course of not just this podcast's life, but mine, slowly regression has been clawing its ways into our society. And so many of these things that were controversial and hot button topics at the time, and what settled into what we assumed were settled law, are now just being torn asunder all around us. What a joy to be alive. And so, yeah, I think the movie is as interesting and prescient as it ever was, which I think is one of the reasons why it is so well considered by such a wide variety of individuals.
And it's incredibly not dated for being a 50-year-old movie. I mean, yeah, you get a little, the fashions are a little stodgy, but generally speaking, the subject matter feels very fresh. The characters are not, terribly cringy. It's, it just, it still lands very well.
And the thing that, ostensibly might tie it a little more to its moments, unfortunately, continues to be very relevant, which is the Olivia Hussey abortion storyline, where the movie in no way judges her for what she's doing. They leave that entirely up to the increasingly creepy, possibly red herring boyfriend played by Keir Dullea to take up the slack and be this very hardcore patriarchal conservative when it comes to her deciding her future. And I've always appreciated that, despite Bob Clark's canon, including a lot of fairly regressive movies, there are, these kind of left-wing pen strokes from him that kind of keep the movie from fully succumbing to a lot of the, easy moral stances of later slasher movies that for, essentially helping invent a genre. It's sort of outclassed a lot of the ones that followed it because it had such a modern sense of itself.
Yeah. Well, I think it's confronting something that is fresh and relatively new, within Clark's lifetime, even within the lifetime of several of the stars of this film. Women being in collegiate settings, in co-ed settings, was a relatively newish thing. There was still pushback from multiple universities, not only in the States, but obviously also in Canada, about the presence of women being on campus to begin with. And then you throw them into a world which does not believe them, care to particularly protect them, and believes that essentially what they're doing at a university is ephemeral. This is like a whim compared to what their ultimate purpose is in the terms of a patriarchal society. And so it really bumps up against all of that. And sadly is not a timepiece. It is not something that we have to sift through the sands of time to locate. It still is as revelatory today, unfortunately, and it makes it very different. That being said, we've been very big proponents on this podcast of, let's say, with Halloween, not making Laurie Strode's unbroken hymen some sort of magical talisman. It's not her virginity that makes her the final girl in that film. It is her awareness and empathy And unfortunately, everyone else is just living their lives, and someone has taken upon themselves to end those lives. It's kind of the magical mystery of Halloween. And Friday the 13th is, and we started as a Friday the 13th podcast. So we know it's very conservative revenge fantasy, model. But that being said, it's also a reflection of its time. I think it's when you get into the copy of a copy of a copy of a copy that we really start to get that sort of highly conservative viewpoint and making the slasher themselves into this, you must hit these particular rules. And then Scream, unfortunately, because of Randy's very good ability to peg people, but having terrible film opinions, people kind of take that on as this cause celeb of, well, Randy said, well, I don't know if you've noticed, Randy's right about people and terribly wrong about movies for the entirety of his Scream life.
Well, I will say, too, that, Halloween having also its own version of a progressive agenda as far as, treating the sexuality and the sexual forwardness of its characters. Carpenter, of course, reached out to Bob Clark when he was making Halloween because they were aware that this thing had been done. And so he came on as a sort of unofficial consultant. And it's also, the timing is kind of interesting because in America, obviously, Roe v. Wade was 1973, but R.V. Morgentaler, which was the Canadian anti-abortion law that struck down the anti-abortion laws that were in place because they were viewed as unconstitutional. That was almost 2 decades later. It was 1988. So it was of a more dubious legality, which does make the sort of, bravado of this movie all the more interesting.
Right.
And, later when Bob Clark is making the Porky's movies, for which he's perhaps best known by a certain subset of the movie-going public, you would not have guessed that this guy was quite as progressive as he was in making those. But at the same time, I guess it does foster an attitude of you're allowed to joke about, sex and spy on people and do all these other horrible sophomoric things.
Regrettably, my first exposure to Bob Clark was
and I think
via Porky.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of people, I'm sure that there are probably the unfortunate folks out there whose first exposure to Bob Clark was Rhinestone or Loose Cannon. Honestly, in my case,
is Barb a Drinkenstein? Yeah. Can we nail this down here?
Drinkenstein, baby. Well, yeah, actually, and this is something that I'm realizing now. My very first Bob Clark movie was an in-theater viewing of Baby Geniuses. Yes.
Yeah, he's what a resume.
What a life.
Truly.
Yes.
All over the place. We haven't even brought up, A Christmas Story, which in my household was totemic. We watched A Christmas Story in theaters. My youngest brother, I think it was his first in-theater experience, and his laughter managed to get the entire theater into the idea that this was funny. And I still believe it is funny, but they weren't quite feeling it right away. But the way he laughs forces other people to understand that humor is being attempted. And he just got the entire theater going here. So, yeah, when I hit Black Christmas, my idea of what a Bob Clark movie is very different. That being said, I will say, and this is the faintest of praise, Porky's 2 has a weirdly progressive slant to it. And Patrick, you're saying there's no fucking possibility that is true, but honestly, it is. And I think it contains the only genuinely funny moments in any Porky's movie. I'm going to leave it to you to decide whether or not I'm insane. That being said,
I was going to say, was it the pro-Indigenous stance?
It has a weirdly pro-Indigenous stance, anti-KKK, also anti.
But it's also got a character who has fake boobies full of vomit.
But she does. But she's trying to get this KKK politician who's on the take. She's trying to take him down. I need to stop talking about Porky's 2. We have gone off the rails.
Well,
All right.
I should also say that the very first feature that Bob Clark made, he the same year he made Black Christmas, he made the incredible Dead of Night, which is to my way of thinking, perhaps the definitive horror movie, like full on horror movie about the Vietnam War. Even more so than something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it deliberately and quite purposely confronts the horrors of returning from a war zone and what that sort of, what desensitization does to the soul, and what a beautiful movie that is. However, his very first movie is a very curious movie called She-Man, A Story of Fixation. And it is about a man who is blackmailed into taking estrogen and wearing lingerie. And it's, pure exploitation, Herschel Gordon Lewis, David Friedman style, but it was restored it was restored by Nick Winding Refn under his banner. And it was mentioned recently in my dear friends Willow McClay and Caden Mark Gardner's book, Corpses, Fools, and Monsters, An Examination of the Trans Film Image, which is a marvelous, marvelous book that should be read by all enthusiasts of the screen image, especially if you have a fascination, as I do, of developing tastes and the sort of history of screen empathy and how often it had to find its way through in unconventional, very strange ways. But they write quite exquisitely about that film, and it's a very thorny work.
I would imagine.
Yes, indeed. But anyway.
Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms, and sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
If your day sounds like...
We need the report ASAP.
You deserve Modelo. If you've persevered through... You deserve this rich golden lager with a crisp but refreshing taste. Or if you overcame...
2 more reps, 2 more.
You deserve this ice-cold reward. Modelo, the Remarkable Fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Port Chicago, Illinois.
From the makers of Rice-A-Roni comes Macaroni, a creamy, delicious boxed mac and cheese that's not just good, it's cheesy good. Macaroni will please even the pickiest eaters with 2 magnificent flavors that will melt your heart, creamy cheddar and creamy white cheddar. If you love cheese, you'll love Macaroni by the makers of Rice-A-Roni. If you don't love cheese, well, that's just unbelievable. Try Macaroni. It's cheesy good.
Macaroni, the San Francisco treat.
Now, Scout, here on Kill by Kill, we've generally found a way to avoid holiday/Christmas in particular horror. We're not enthusiasts. And a while back, and when I say we, I mean I got hornswoggled by revisiting the trailer for the 2006 remake into thinking we should talk about this. I remember being not enjoying it very much, but maybe it'll be interesting to talk about. And we had very lovely guests, but I would also conclude it was not interesting to talk about. Whereas I liked
that movie. I thought it was obviously much more indebted to somebody like Lamberto Bava or Brian De Palma than Bob Clark. I think it has ultimately nothing to do with Bob Clark, the stylist, however you want to define that. But I do find it a very entertaining film. And as, one of the films of the guys who worked on the X-Files, Glenn Morgan for heaven's sakes, what's his name? Well, anyway,
James.
Yes, him.
From Final Destination.
Yes, that's
franchise
right.
we covered here.
But anyway, they worked on Willard and Black Christmas, so they had this very kind of grim and grotesque sensibility about returning to the horror of the 70s and bringing this kind of splashy awfulness and directness. So I've always admired those two movies and wish they had worked a little more. Anyway, I do appreciate, however, that it is a retread in all of the ways. It is not, it doesn't necessarily break new ground, which
I wish it had been allowed to break more ground than it was, because it's another one of those movies in which Dimension Films, run by one's absolute monster and his brother, after Scream, so convinced that they know exactly how horror movies are supposed to be, and they had no idea. They never recreated. They always have the worst instincts. They completely gut that movie and reorder it and shoot different footage for the trailer than is actually in the movie. And the whole time you can see where it could have been so much more interesting with actual red herrings and with genuine twists. And then they just wrench all that out to reinsert this other film that they care for more. And I bump up against that conflict when it comes to that particular film.
Oh, sure. I mean, this was the same time that they ruined Wes Craven's werewolf movie. This was a terrible time. It was a bad time for horror, and it was a bad time for film culture in America. We just had, they were buying movies and shelving them. They were, editing them into incoherence. It was a terrible time for studio filmmaking in this country. It was very lucky when things escaped unscathed, and frequently you found directors who really had to sort of go upriver like Colonel Kurtz to make films that seem ludicrous on paper in order to get any real work done. I think about Gore Verbinski making 2 Pirates movies at the exact same time for a shooting schedule that I believe lasted something like 270 days.
Wow.
And all of this just to make sure that he was able to make a coherent political film that also had the state-of-the-art special effects and all this stuff. These were not opportunities that people were sort of allowed to throw away, because there was no sense that American cinema would recover, and in many ways it hasn't. And things have gotten quite a bit worse. So all this to say, yes, you're right that the sort of prevailing impulse here of revision and destruction, especially in the hands of the Weinsteins, who were, for a host of reasons, 2 of the most destructive and terrible people to ever happen to, the film industry and to human beings at large. And that's, that if anything, it makes the permissiveness of the original Black Christmas all the more miraculous, because you think, 30 years had passed, all the things that you could now get away with. And, there's very little evidence that that's true beyond the more plentiful gore.
Yeah, and even that, some of that's weirdly curtailed. It's an odd one. But as a result, we've not dipped back into the Christmas horror well, even though the SEO gods often demand it come December. And so we just suffer the consequences. And for a while, we did Amityville for Christmas, where we just picked a random Amityville movie and hoped it would be good or at least entertaining. And we were squishy on that.
I was going to say.
But with listen, when that lamp comes to life and it turns out it has veins,
it can make phone calls.
And it makes phone calls, which weirdly dovetails into the original Black Christmas. And we're, of course, celebrating its 50th anniversary here. So at least the SEO gods are getting that. But when it comes to phone calls...
Happy birthday, Black Christmas.
Yeah. When it comes to phone calls, Black Christmas has a bunch of them. And I guess when it comes down to it, one of the big takeaways here is that the system at this point in 1974 or even now cannot handle this. what is happening in this house to these women.
Mm-hmm.
The incompetence around them is rampant. Like the school, we see 3 people silently watching the worst fucking piano recital of all time. That's the only time we see school officials. The cops are staffed by dolts and a couple overconfident knobs.
Everybody's on Christmas vacation.
Right.
Everybody has bailed out of town, including much of the staff of the police station.
Yeah, and even the people who have wandered into town, like a parent or some boyfriends who are still around, who know these girls better than the system, are just unprepared or unwilling to do much but follow the instructions of dolts and knobs. It's really revelatory how simply and entertainingly Black Christmas demonstrates that we undervalue what women have to say, and we don't believe them when they say it.
Well, it's also interesting because I was saying that it's not very dated. One part, that does make it dated is in the handling of these. You can't even call them prank calls. They're beyond prank calls. They are productions. They are harassment. They are harassing. They are threatening. They are very effectively chilling.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, this is decades before such things as caller ID existed, where I do not know, other than using burner phones and whatever code you punch in to block your number makes it possible to harass anyone via telephone at this point. But the whole thing is, well, you have to keep them on the phone for anywhere from 3 minutes to 4 hours before we could figure out where he
primitive call tracing,
where he is, and and then it's the old, well, he's he's right there in the house the whole time, and it's just it sort of makes the widespread incompetence alternately funny and frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, because in many senses, the phone in this movie is this modern intrusion into safety zones. It allows communication, but it also allows anyone to call. And so I guess one of the questions I have, let's start with the phone calls themselves. Do the phone calls indicate that Billy has a form of schizophrenia? Is this just how he communicates by playing all these roles all at once? Would this have happened in terms of the representation of Billy on the phone, happened if not for The Exorcist? Because you can really pick up a lot of let's go for Mercedes McCambridge after a couple packets of cigs going on here.
Well, I wonder, because these were essentially contemporaneous releases. So I'm not sure how much influence The Exorcist would have had on Black Christmas. But
because it comes out, Christmas comes out 74 and then Exorcist is Christmas of 73. So, but is that early in 74? This is something I should have looked up before just asking a guest. Will you fill in the history of this film?
I would think that they were already making the movie before, given how long.
But it's not like they're doing those phone calls live into the actress's ears or anything.
Oh no, but I mean, I suppose that if I'm wrong, that does make a ton of sense, because there's definitely that going on. I will say, having done just let's say a cursory amount of research into schizophrenia, it's very much a movie version of that. I both having been at the mercy of a schizophrenic stalker, and also when I was a kid, I was in a clinical trial video. I was looking for work as an actor. I was about 12 years old or something like this. And a friend's mom was a casting director for industrial videos. And I got a sweet gig playing a young schizophrenic boy. And so they took us into a clinician's studio in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and we watched footage of real schizophrenics to get a sense of the severity of cases. The idea is that you portray a certain degree of severity of schizophrenia so that a clinician will know later when encountering this behavior in the wild how much of a dosage to give this person. And so, obviously insanity takes on many forms, but it's very rarely the kind of thing that you see in movies that way. But
Sure.
The sound design on the phone calls is effectively unnerving and just horrifying. And all the more so because when the movie ends, there seems to be very little doubt that it has nothing to do with the main problems confronting the girls. Besides this, it just happens that there's somebody making a very elaborate display of themselves at the exact same time that a serial killer has crept into their attic and one of their boyfriends has snapped his tether.
Right. It's a lot of confluence of events, but then again, we don't come to Black Christmas for absolute reality. We're looking for a fantasy and elevated version.
That's right. When I was in 2009, I was making a documentary about Canadian indie rock musicians, and I went to Toronto to meet with people in bands like Do Make Safe Think and The Holy Fuck and Gentleman Reg and all these other people whose music I really loved. But the one thing that I made time for as a tourist was I wanted to go to the University of Toronto because I wanted to see the campus where they shot this movie. I made time for that because I was such a huge fan of this film. And by the time that I got up there, I had seen it probably a dozen times, and I've seen it probably a dozen times since. Anyway, I guess that's neither here nor there, but there.
Well, it definitely evokes a sense of time and place. Like, there are not a lot of movies that really look like this. No. And so it very much sets it apart from what would eventually kind of crystallize around a lot of pretty young people from teenage to early college. And sort of a summary, about as fall as it gets, is like Happy Birthday to me.
Oh, sure.
My personal favorite, which will demonstrate what my taste is like. And so,
directed by J. Lee Thompson, of all people.
I love the man. Listen, could 20 minutes of that movie go? Absolutely. Do I love that it remains? You bet. So the other question I have about the phone calls is, in the actual realm of the movie, when the lineman Graham comes to a calling to set up this tap, he asks how many phones are in this house, and Jess answers 2. There's one here and one in the hall. When she first answers the Billy call, she picks it up and says, "It's him again, the moaner." So has Billy been building up to this? Or do we have a confluence of events where we had a moaner making these types of phone calls, and then Billy also happens to love making these phone calls? And what phone is he making them from?
Yeah, that's the thing, is I don't think that it's him making the phone. I think the man in the attic and the man on the phone are two separate parties. Possibly they're in collaboration. Who knows? But that's the opinion that I hold.
Because ultimately, like, the only time the two converge is when he's standing over Barb, and he's, talking about Agnes. Mm-hmm. That's the only time those two things kind of converge into one person and sort of solidify the idea it's been Billy on the phone. But everything else would lead you to believe there's no way this dude is just tapping phone lines to make phone calls from the attic.
I mean, I think mostly because of the scene where he starts talking about Agnes, that it is the same person. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I also think that he's been making these phone calls for a while.
Yeah.
And it's just been escalating, and I think it's just it kind of gives a sense, the sense of unease of the ending of Halloween, where he's sort of everywhere at once. Yeah. Like he couldn't possibly be in this house making these phone calls, but there's somebody in this house.
Yeah.
So I think it's just too, it's never quite made clear. It's in that way, it makes the jolt of the ending that much more effective. It's like, oh, they didn't do shit.
Yes.
Yeah.
At least one of these dangers is still out there.
It is wild how this movie ends. It is absolutely chilling.
It's a true, Patrick, what we have come to call the It's Miller Time ending. when they just, the cops, assume that they've got the whole thing just wrapped up.
Yeah.
It's 2 days before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I got to pick up some gifts for the old lady. Let's hurry up. Let's get this going. She'll be fine. Just leave her in the house all by herself.
Yeah, there's still blood on the door.
All of her friends are dead. There are still 2 corpses we haven't discovered yet.
Yes, it starts on the corpses. They haven't searched the entire property. They're just like, oh, we gots to get out of here. This is depressing.
Well, it's perfect in its way that it's, it's obviously unbelievable. And, well, I mean, I shouldn't say obviously unbelievable. It beggars belief that, this would be the natural response of law enforcement. But everything we've seen up until now also says perhaps this is the way that the local PD in Toronto would have handled this over Christmas break if they've done such a terrific job of tracking down possible leads up until now. Despite my affection for John Saxon, it doesn't seem entirely impossible that they'd be that incompetent. However, it's the perfect ending for the movie because it reinforces what it's been saying the entire time, which is that these girls are in danger no matter what form of authority, comes in ostensibly to swoop in and protect them, because there is no protecting you from a certain kind of coercive, horrible, impish male presence in that way.
Yes.
And
the male aspect of this is what causes everyone to leave the house.
Yeah.
When Mr. Harrison starts having his shock attack, everyone's like,
let's get him out. Yeah,
whoa.
Let's
priority given to this old man.
Exactly. Yeah, and not of course putting it together that a huge part of why he's having this reaction is because there was a complete failure to protect his daughter. So the cycle continues. And, you mentioned the phone being this intrusion of modernity into this thing, but it harks back in a way that I really like without ever once kind of tipping its hat towards older movies where, you think about the sort of earliest version of dorm room movies, whether that's college films or something like Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory, which is a favorite of mine.
A poster I have in my living room
there you go.
Right now.
Perfect. That this is a developing situation. And so there are now a million new ways for the safety and sanctity of something that I'm sure at some point seemed perfectly harmless to now seem unprotected. That, if you believe that everything that you encounter in the world is in contributing to your illness, it means that you need 1,000 more cures. And such was the way with the more technology and the more ways that you are aware of yourself in modern life, the more ways to pervert that space there were. And that's, a kind of a fascinating study and Christmas Story sort of takes this as well, because it's very much a nostalgic movie looking backwards to this period of, supposed, beautiful, but also, this was not a beautiful time. It was a time full of morons. And this is very much that same argument, which is, we look back on this period with a certain degree of nostalgia for simpler times. But what it meant was, if you were one of a handful of serial killers who got the idea, Zodiac or whoever, and this indeed was based on a real case. They called him, it was the vampire, the vampire rapist, which was a horrible name, but it was a real, he was a real serial killer named Wayne Bowden. He killed 3 women in Montreal in the late 60s. And, that's the thing, is that the more that modernity gives us ways to sort of, complicate what we understand about our lives and industry and things like this, the harder it becomes to protect oneself, because there are now more ways than ever to be gotten to. And the increasing, the way that, you go to college and you're left on your own. And that's the thing that's kind of really ingratiating in its way is that when you're first introduced to the sorority house, it's such a weird haven. I have always loved the introduction of this movie because hanging out with Olivia Hussey and Margot Kidder and Andrea Martin and everybody else, it's like, this is wonderful. Like, who wouldn't want to take part in this? It's this, weird, sarcastic family of girls who clearly have very odd relationships to their home lives and to each other, but it's a really beautiful place. And even with the tacky 70s decor and the horrible carpeting and tapestries and paintings and stuff, I find it all very, very welcoming and warm and odd. And obviously,
well, I mean, who else would pick out curtains like that? Those curtains are nice.
Oh, absolutely.
But that being said, I to pick up what you're putting down, Claire, Phil, Barb, Jess, they are very different people. They are from different backgrounds. They have different things going on in their lives, but they're appreciative of the fact that together they form a bubble which allows them to be themselves. They have friction. Obviously, Barb and Claire are very different people, and that causes friction between them, and that's exasperated at various points. But ultimately, everyone understands that, listen, Barb has a rough home life with uncaring people. Claire has had maybe an overprotective family life, and they were bound to clash up against one another. But we can exist within this house framework as people who support one another in general and in specific. And for the most part, they do.
Well, that's one of the things that I really strongly disliked about the 2000s remake is there's so much manufactured conflict between these like sorority sisters or dorm mates or whatever you want to call them. And it's like, I don't give a shit about this. Let's get to the actual meat of the story and just stop with the infighting and the bitchiness and like the soap opera style dealings of these characters. And just, I don't need any of that. This feels more lived in and believable.
Yeah, very much.
They're very much a chosen family, and you have Mrs. Mack, whom I think everyone there kind of understands is an outlier to a certain degree with how she's chosen to live a life, and she is sort of this mother figure they rebel against but rely upon, and they don't get along perfectly, but they've surrounded each other with themselves as a buffer to a quite literally cold and indifferent college world. And these four women have chosen to go to the college route at this moment in time sort of denotes that each of them has aspirations well beyond whatever supposed safe suburban life with a husband and 2.5 children. They could have chosen that path. They did not want to do that. They had larger dreams for themselves. Jess is the one who says it the most plainly, but it seems obvious that all of them have chosen to go this route for a specific reason. They are not the normal girl who came out of their high school. They were built different, and they came here, and that is the thing that unites them, and what makes it such a tragedy when Billy tears it all apart.
Yeah, the warmth of the place falls away, and suddenly this building that seemed so interesting and alive now so quiet and scary, and just the idea of Olivia Hussey having to walk up and down stairs with the carpeting and the sort of old wood construction and things like this. It's now everything about it that seems inviting is now weaponized against her.
It becomes enclosed. It becomes a maze when before it was delightful and homespun. I sort of have really had a hard time quite deciding what Billy is and isn't, to get back to him ever so briefly. And it took a recent cinematic venture for me to kind of figure it out. I think that in any sort of system, an antibody might be created with the goal of quelling dissent and change, right? If Billy is anything, he is that patriarchal antibody unleashed into a troubled environment with the goal of reshifting power away from, let's say, young, educated, independent women who are in charge of their own bodies, and put that power back into the hands of prudes, dolts, and raging dickheads. And guess what? He's fucking successful. And that's when I was like, well, so what is Billy? I think Billy is a gremlin masking as a human being. Now, this is influenced somewhat by a recent Alamo Drafthouse screening of Gremlins on the big screen that I was privileged to go see. But the parallels are there. Billy's just like an agent of chaos. He's slipped through the cracks of reality from wherever the hell he came from to cause very specific mayhem so that incompetent institutions can remain in place and keep fucking up. And guess what? Again, they're successful at fucking up at the end of this.
Oh, yeah.
It's, I love too, the shot of the eye is so malevolent and so horrifying. The eye peeking through the door. It's just this red glow to it. It does seem vaguely inhuman. I think it's Guillermo del Toro talked about the films of Dario Argento as being movies set in a universe of cruelty and pain and misery and conspiracy where everything is evil. And that's, Black Christmas kind of has it falling, this gentle sort of descent of evil onto this place of otherwise liberated minds and hearts of, women who want to simply exist and have all the freedoms guaranteed to all of the men around them. And, it sort of just becomes bent as more and more horrible things start happening. And it's especially loaded that it takes place over the Christmas holiday, because what else is supposed to be safer, and more together and more wonderful. And
what more linked holiday is there to traditional nuclear family sort of ethos?
There's quite a beautiful Canadian Christmas movie called Mon Oncle Antoine by Claude Jutra, which was a success a few years before this. I believe that was 1971. And so the Canadians have a very interesting cinematic relationship to this holiday, and the things that they get and that we don't. The weird bits of overlap and contradiction I've always found very fascinating.
Well, you've really classed up the joint, because I've referenced Happy Birthday to me.
And Porky's too.
And Porky's too. I offered a defense of Porky's too.
But again, it's just the landscape is different, as much as, certain portions of America, the Midwest and the Northeast, have very, very cold and snowy Christmases. It's a constant in vast swaths of Canada. And if you drive around up there, you come to realize how different Toronto must have been, especially in the 70s, as it was, becoming a sort of mecca for progressivism as well as technology. Because so much of the Canadian, hinterland is identical. It's just flat land for as far as the eye could see. Yeah. I drove from Sackville, New Brunswick, which is about the last stop before the Atlantic Ocean, to Toronto. And it took me 2 days to do it. And there was just nothing. There was truly nothing. And so, everything in Black Christmas must, have really seemed like a shock to the system of so many people living in, fairly conservative establishment towns, farming and mining and things like that. That's My Bloody Valentine is also a great companion piece to this, because that's a film very deliberately about the death of mining culture in, the sort of Canadian industry towns. And, that too seems to hint at the idea of infidelity as a sign of changing mores and times. And again, the things that you can no longer defend against.
Yeah. And listen, that movie has some of the best horror characters of all time. And that being said, I think the characters here are equally as sparkling and diverse and interesting. Granted, it's a very white film, but we'll leave that for that. It's 1974. But I think each of these sort of, non-narrow archetypes gives each of these actresses opportunities to really develop and show who these characters are, both without pressure and under pressure. And a lot of them come up on top. You know, they're not simple archetypes necessarily. It's too early in the process for that as both a horror, thing and a slasher thing necessarily. And so I don't think that's unsurprising. But, if we can get into the characters a little bit, when it comes to Jess, first off, every time she answers the phone, it's like she's never heard of this invention. Every time hello, like you don't have to yell at.
I was going to say she does kind of shout into the phone each time.
It's like it's a gramophone or something, and she's like yelling for someone to come in here. I've spilled coffee in my lap or something. It is wild. She never answers the phone in a normal manner, but that's okay.
Well, I think she was
few
probably
people
new
are
to
able
it.
to dress in black and yellow like she is, so she gets away with anything.
I love her outfit in this movie. I love the weird shirt with the hands on it.
My friend Amalia made sweaters.
Oh hell yeah!
Identical to this for a couple of Christmases in a row, and it's even weirder in real life.
It's oh god, I just love it, and yeah, no, it's she's so perfectly mannered and weird because she was so out of place where she's at that point what she would have been known as more than anything was as Juliet in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet film from I want to say 1967, possibly 1968. And he of course made these completely charisma-free Shakespeare adaptations. That was his line for a long time, and he would occasionally make these ridiculously overcranked, operatic studies of other major historical figures. If you've never seen Young Toscanini and you need a laugh, by all means throw that on. Starring a queening out Elizabeth Taylor in, I think that was 1989. Just a famous piece of camp nonsense. But she was, I think, like all throughout Olivia Hussey's career, she was uniquely unprepared for the challenges that were placed before her.
She's just from a different place. She never feels settled within the space that she's
quite
in.
Literally. I mean, she was born in Buenos Aires to English parents, I want to say. And her child is now in movies. But anyway, she was in a lot of very bizarre tax shelter projects. She was in Death on the Nile. She was in Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth miniseries. She plays, I believe, the Virgin Mary in that. And then she was in the Australian horror film Turkey Shoot. Apparently she basically wouldn't leave her trailer because she was so terrified of the Australian wildlife that she kept seeing. Every time she would leave, she would see some new horrifying spider or lizard and just run right back inside, and so hated doing it. She was just somebody who never found a niche and thus never truly felt at home. And
my favorite tidbit about Turkey Shoot is that at some point they started to run out of money, and the lead's like, where did all the money go? And then he finds out that they've lost a significant amount of the budget at the dog track.
Makes sense.
And they start using live ammo
Yep.
and explosives.
Yep.
Because they cannot afford the unreal ones.
Yep. Yeah, no, she had terrible luck. She was in Kinji Fukasaku's Virus, which was a film beset by creative problems and financial difficulties as well. She was in a star-studded and completely boring remake of The Cat and the Canary in 1978, I want to say. She just truly got the short end of the stick in almost every way that it's possible to do that. That story I was telling you about her meeting Steve Martin, that was on a movie that she didn't get the part in. she was auditioning to play the lead in Steve Martin's film of Roxanne, directed, I believe, by a different Australian, Fred Trapisi. And she did not get that part. She was truly she just had poor fortune, and thus her kind of queenly, out of place feeling is both always appropriate and always a little jarring as well.
Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms, and sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
From the makers of Rice-A-Roni comes Macaroni, a creamy, delicious boxed mac and cheese that's not just good, it's cheesy good. Macaroni will please even the pickiest eaters with 2 magnificent flavors that will melt your heart: creamy cheddar and creamy white cheddar. If you love cheese, you'll love Macaroni by the makers of Rice-A-Roni. If you don't love cheese, well, that's just unbelievable. Try Macaroni. It's cheesy good.
Macaroni, the San Francisco treat.
But here it underlines the fact that Jess has very specific dreams. She never really outlines what those things are, but she is going to college for a purpose. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that her dalliance with this man-child has resulted in an unfortunate pregnancy is very clear to her. This is something that can be solved, and I'm going to solve it. I'm not going to do it without telling you first. Now, does she pick the perfect time to tell him? Not necessarily. No. That being said, his reaction absolutely pegs him as a possible murderer, even to those who understand he's not.
Yeah, you can definitely just see something in his eyes go from like stunned to kill.
That scene when he plays piano.
Oh, it's amazing. It's perfect too, because you don't know how different it is from the audition piece he was planning, because he does seem like that kind of sensitive artiste that he might just get up there and, completely throw away the audition anyway. That one, it took me a couple of viewings to realize that he was blowing it. that he was not, just an avant-garde composer in training, that he was in fact deliberately alienating his audience. Because at that point I was a huge fan of avant-garde music when I saw it. I was just getting into the Philip Glasses of the world, and
everything that you just know that this conversation is not going to go well when his primary solution to her saying, "I'm pregnant, I'm having an abortion," is, "Well, I'm going to quit school so we can get married."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she's like, "I don't want to get married." He's just like sort of just vaguely stunned at this.
But again, we talk about the sort of intrusion of modernity. How normalized must that have been up until a certain point in history? That was, you gave that news to your boyfriend and that was expected to be the response. 74 is fairly young in the age of, a more progressive understanding of pregnancy and that your life could go any direction that you wanted to, instead of the direction that these things always tended to go.
And much has been made of this film's feminist, sort of second wave feminist leanings, and I won't dispute that at all. And it's frank, conversation concerning abortion. But what really underlines how shitty a person Peter is his reaction to it.
Oh, yes.
Both after he's immediately been told and later on after he's, tried to murder a piano with his hands. And his response is, back at the sorority house, is, "What are you trying to do to me? My guy, you suck." It's not just the frank discussion of abortion. It's his incredibly shitty reaction, which is an implicit threat that if Jess does anything that Peter does not approve of, it is well within his right as, all capital letters, a man, to do what he wants, which is break into your house and maybe try to kill you.
Well, it's also interesting that he keeps referring to it as the baby. What about the baby? What about our baby? And it is clear that she does not think of it as their baby.
No.
It is a problem that she is planning on solving.
And it can be solved. And his plans do not fit into her condition. She's very frank with, I told you why I was here. You told me why you were here. This was not planned. This is not something we wanted. Therefore, it is not something I want. You're changing your mind after the fact. And honestly, it's not your fucking decision to make because it's happening within my body. And Peter does not fucking get it. And he just starts lurking outside this house any opportunity he gets. If Billy was not there, I do believe he would have ended up dead that night. This was just going to fucking happen.
Or certainly, thrown out on his ass regardless. This was not going to go the way that he wanted it to. And, the creepy intrusion and the breaking into the house and everything. That's the bit that remains sort of unresolved is who do we think killed the cop standing outside guard of the sorority house?
Because we never really see Billy go up. Once he's in the house, he's in the house. Conversely, who killed the teenage girl that they find in the park? Is that something that happened while Billy was on his way to the sorority house? Did he really ultimately, is that like his version? Was that the Agnes he was originally focused on? And that murder happened and his escape from that murder scene puts him in the attic of the sorority house?
Well,
or is that entirely unrelated?
It's just it just continues to build the film's atmosphere of evil, of malevolence, of just not trusting, that you can walk outside your door without being attacked. I have, complaints about the 2019 Black Christmas remake, but I do think that they get at something, which is that the thing that hasn't changed in the 50 years since the original Black Christmas is that it really still doesn't feel like a particularly safe place or time to leave your house on a college campus, because you just don't know the insane things going on in people's heads. And, when today is the day that some man has read the wrong piece of literature and snapped his tether and decided to go on a killing spree or whatever it is, that Black Christmas as a text sort of supports this eternal perversion, this constant descent of evil and murder and madness. And unfortunately, that's a big part of why the film has staying powers, because those things are still true.
And it makes, I think, a character who doesn't get a lot of play because of how early she dies. But it's one of the more interesting sort of relationships here, because we see more of her family life than anyone else's, and that's Claire. Mm-hmm. Now, Barb diagnoses her as a professional virgin, which I think is probably an overreach. Obviously, Barb is much more learned about the world, whether for good or for ill. And so I don't think she cuts Claire a lot of slack. But once you meet Claire's dad, you're like, wow, I can't believe she got out of the house like ever, because he is one of the most ineffectual prigs ever captured on film. Like a snowball takes him down. He is felled by a snowball thrown by a child.
And it's a great performance too, because especially, you meet him and you got to beat on him instantly. But that actor, I think, sort of does eventually become an ingratiating presence. And the more that you understand about the world that he's sort of come to collect his daughter from, and the more that you understand, that he's not going to get to do that. And, that all of the fear that this man clearly lives with, in this case, they were founded. That's the sort of the really heartbreaking thing about that character.
Yeah.
Well, but I think his fears are more rooted in the independence he sees amongst the women that Claire is living with than should be aimed at the men who couldn't give a shit about Claire's safety and liveliness.
I think it's, it starts out as that, and then as the movie goes on, you can just sort of see it dawning on him. Oh, okay, there's actually something wrong, and it's not, oh, she's drinking and having sex. There's something actually bad has happened to her.
It is only because of Mr. Harrison and Claire's boyfriend, who wanders around a certain portion of this movie dressed like Craven the fucking Hunter. When they sound the alarm, that's when the police go, oh, perhaps I should take this seriously. The men have spoken. Whereas when the women come into the police station, they're like, Claire's undoubtedly just skipped town with a boyfriend and in a cabin. That is what has happened. And everything else is your hysterical, daydreams.
Well, I love Art Hindle's performance in this movie as the one man who actually takes action and can sort of see through his peers and not, be mollified by, the police saying we're looking into it. I like him bursting into the police station and really sort of having a take no prisoners attitude. I love him as an actor regardless. He made a bunch of very classic genre films. He's terrific in The Brood and in Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well. And he's just got this great presence. You see him in the hockey pitch or whatever. He's got this very earthy quality, which is, of course, pitched as the opposite of Keir Dulley's very arch academic who has been much like the killer in the dreadful Lamont Johnson movie Lipstick. He's been warped by music. He's been turned into a killer.
I was thinking about that I was actually thinking about that movie when you mentioned the avant-garde music and the
how fucking crazy is that movie?
The shrieking synthesizer music.
That guy.
Would you like to listen to the music I've composed?
It's the only movie in history to argue that a synthesizer turned a man into a fucking pervert and criminal and murderer and rapist. Like that, literally, that unlocked, literally some people joined the Human League, others became Ted Bundy. That was what the synthesizer's power was.
Right, those were your options, is Giorgio Moroder or your BTK.
Yeah, that's very much. You could become Green Cartwright, or you could start ABCs, or you could become a horrible mutilator and a browbeating rapist. Yes, it's boy, the 70s were a wild time.
They really were. They were really confronting a strange and odd world in interesting ways. Art is a mirror, and this is what people thought.
Yes, very much. That's oh boy.
Speaking of ripe characterization, we would be bereft if we didn't go in order of deaths here and talk about Mrs. Mack. She has very bad taste in sherry. That being said, if you find the right sherry, everybody, especially a dry one, something from Spain or Portugal, I would encourage you to give it a whirl. It's much better than you might think it is. She has the loudest combination of patterns ever captured on film in single outfits.
And yet she complains.
I just love how she shits on all the gifts.
Oh yeah,
it's like this sucks. I wouldn't wear this if I was getting my liver taken out. Like can't even wait till she's alone in her room to gripe about the present. She's just muttering under her breath. I aspire to that kind of old lady bitchiness.
It's again, it's the ill-equipped adults in a new world of depravity where you've got this woman who is living with these girls and still seems as though they, first of all, have clearly been running circles around her the entire semester, where they've got an open bar in the in the living room. There's no sense of them keeping themselves together or behaving in any way that is, collegiate or stoic or academic or whatever. And of course, she all but encourages this by being the biggest alcoholic slob of all of them.
But she feels the need to hide her alcohol, whereas the girls do not.
No, they're making drinks when we meet them. It's like a Christmas party, and they have a classic little bar right there, as if it were like a Vanity Fair photo shoot Christmas party or something.
Oh, the loudness of this photo shoot, if only it were to come to pass. I also have one theory when it comes to Mrs. Mac, and that is Claude the cat actually does not like her very much.
No, I also get the distinct impression that cat is hiding.
That cat would rather hang around a corpse than answer her call. And when Billy offs her with a hook on a rope, has he practiced that before? Has he been up there with melons working that out? Or is he just really good?
He's just very crafty. I mean, he did break into the attic without being caught. You know, we have to give it to him. He's an enterprising young man.
He's gained all the confidence in the world with his surreptitious hacking of the phone lines with a phone he does not possess and all of that. I dig Mrs. Mac. She's one of those fantastic Canucksploitation characters that I feel only happens in a tax-sheltered film. You can only be that real and that specific if you really know what you're doing and you have some sort of lived-in experience you're going off of. She feels human and like she has blood.
And there's an unhurried, the Canadian pacing of movies. This is something my dad and I used to talk about all the time. You could always tell a Canadian movie because nobody's in any particular hurry. And, I think that does allow for a little more character work to get done, certainly. And, Bob Clark, I think, wanting to relish a little more in performances and character details than necessarily making the plot go forward or anything. You get to know everybody fairly comprehensively, which does make it a much more tragic movie than if it had sped through everything. Where in Halloween, when people are getting killed, it has force because John Carpenter's formalism as a director, I think, really puts you and situates you physically in those spaces. And because those actors are doing, good work, it does do that. But I think the Black Christmas gives you a much, much, messier sense of people and all of their contradictions and all of the very human things about them. And you spend more time with them on their off hours, which I think is why this movie really does have the heft it does. It is not a movie in any particular hurry, and yet because this atmosphere of dread falls on it early and never relents, it becomes a sort of increasingly oppressive experience while never losing its charm, I would argue.
And it's interesting, like at least Halloween, has Deborah Hill
very much
really infusing those female characters with lived experience. She understands that dynamic. She exploits it in certain ways. Those girls are different than one another. And it makes sense because she has that lived experience. Whereas Black Christmas, you basically have a primarily male, creative team behind the camera here. And yet they're definitely dipping into women's issues and second wave feminism and what it must be like to be in college at the specific time and that men aren't listening to you. All these things still come across very quickly, very strongly. It does not feel like women written by men necessarily. I've not heard that as a criticism levied at Black Christmas.
No, and I think a part of it, is that he gave them room to make these characters their own. I don't really get the sense of there being a slavishness to the screenplay. The best of Black Christmas feels like genuinely captured behavior as opposed to people following a script to the letter. All the police station stuff with John Saxon and the other detective laughing at the desk sergeant, that all feels real. It's perfectly shot in a way that captures the atmosphere of that building. But it could be a comic bit. It could be, and it's amazing the air and space he gave to all of these sets and set pieces and to the behavior that everybody is allowed to sort of demonstrate who they are to us without the movie having to tell us who they are.
And I think one of the best examples of that is Margot Kidder, who is an absolute, force of nature in this film.
Love Margot Kidder. Got dealt a raw deal by Hollywood, but man, she was so luminous and talented and wonderful.
She is really good in this. She's really good in almost everything that she's in. She elevates things to a different level. That she was so iconic and yet so tossed off. I mean, just think about in terms of box office power. right? 1978, the biggest movie at the box office is Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Margot Kidder murders in that movie. The biggest movie in 1979 is the Amityville Horror. She's in 2 of the biggest box office hits back to back.
Mm-hmm.
And Hollywood's kind of, by 1980, is kind of like, I don't know, she's been in some movies or something. She's a broad who likes to talk back, and she just gets axe murdered out of this industry.
Well, it's very similar in a way to Olivia Hussey. Olivia Hussey, when she was young, she was approached by Hal Wallace, who offered her True Grit and something else. And she basically very meekly was like, I don't really want to do that. And that, like, she lost her contract on the spot because you weren't allowed to be outspoken, and Margot Kidder was nothing if not outspoken. It's one of a million reasons I love Rob Zombie, is because he gave her a pretty great part in Halloween 2 years after the fact, of her being ostracized in Hollywood. And, it was because he had great memories of her on screen and knew that she could do the job. That's the Rob Zombie credo. And that's why I love him so much, is that it doesn't matter, what your reputation is. He wants you because you've got a great screen presence and because you were good in things and you haven't been given a fair shake by the industry. And God knows nobody got, more of a raw deal than Margot Kidder did.
What I like about Barb in particular is that she's a choker fan. She has a rich mom who's a real bitch sometimes, from what we hear. And she has enough dough to drag multiple people skiing. That's not cheap.
No, she's like the opposite of that kid from The Holdovers. She wants to spread the wealth around.
Exactly. In every way, shape, and form. She enjoys a drink or two. Yes, she will talk your ear off about turtle orgasms and how long they fuck.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's valid. These are things she's learned. Just because you're not interested in them doesn't mean they're not interesting. Barb fucking rocks. Of the movie characters that we have covered and we've found ourselves falling in love with them, Gena, I have to believe we have to add Barb to this list. She fucking cooks.
No, sure. Yeah, absolutely. She, in keeping with Margot Kidder being underrated in general, she's often left out of the conversation with, iconic female horror characters.
I think a lot of people try to put this on, but when the rubber meets the road, Margot Kidder has that certain something that allows her to get away with what other people can't.
Mm-hmm. She's got I think what it is, she has a certain hardness to her that I think certainly, at least during the time and definitely after the success of Superman, thought that audiences, particularly male audiences, would not react well to. Where you cannot see her. But yeah, she is saved in Superman, but she is, not going to be the very, sensitive female lead who needs to be, saved by the romantic hero. And I think she just sort of, they didn't know what to do with her. And I think that's here. It's just like nobody really knows what to do with her. So they're just like, well, just let Barb be Barb.
It was the perfect era for her to become famous, which then led into the worst era for her to maintain her star status.
She I think lost her shot around the same time that you stop seeing actors like Charles Durning, lead a leading role in a movie.
Well, it's we directly before, and what probably got her the job in Black Christmas, she was in De Palma's Sisters, where not only did we hear a French Canadian accent from her, which I think she would have learned organically having grown up in Yellowknife, and also working in the Canadian film industry. But she's so much less a formidable presence that the hook of Sisters is that she seems very naive and very helpless. And then suddenly she commits this very shocking, violent act, and it refigures everything we know about her. And the reason that movie works, I would argue, is because of that performance. Because Jennifer Salt comes in, who is much more the aggressive, overbearing, female character that Brian De Palma so loved to take down a pig. One of his lovable quirks. But I think Margot Kidder is the reason that movie stays interesting, is because she has presented this angelic face that has then been completely torn off and revealed something more malevolent and evil, and that's why you're hooked, because you want to see what happens next and what accounts for this. And then if she had gotten famous in the 60s and then been allowed to flourish in the 70s, like a Gena Rowlands or a Tuesday Weld or Susan Tyrrell or somebody like that, then that would have been the proving ground for that stuff. But by the time she was one of the biggest box office fixtures in the world, the era for interesting female characters was now essentially being relegated to what we would later call the Sundance film. You think about all the amazing movies that Sissy Spacek made during this period because she happened to know people who were very interested in making sure she had the space to give those performances. Some of them were for her husband, Jack Fisk, or for friends of hers. These were opportunities you had to make for yourself, because American TV and American movies were never more superficial than they were in the 1980s. I mean, perhaps we've reached that period now again. Things are bad now, but in the 80s they were quite bad. And if you weren't somebody who could fill out a Beverly Hills Cop movie by being the attractive henchwoman or the person who beds the hero, then there really wasn't all that much room for you. Even Kelly McGillis, who does great work in Top Gun, she winds up sleeping with Tom Cruise in the most overblown sex scene of the 1980s. Like, it's just, that was what you had to allow yourself to become party to. And I can't imagine that somebody who at that point had become famous on the back of not being, the sex pot character or the completely helpless, waif character or the hero's wife or sister or whatever, like, this is somebody with personality, and there was just no place for somebody like that in the studio system of the 1980s. It was a huge tragedy.
Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms, and sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
From the makers of Rice-A-Roni comes Macaroni, a creamy, delicious boxed mac and cheese that's not just good, it's cheesy good. Macaroni will please even the pickiest eaters with two magnificent flavors that will melt your heart: creamy cheddar and creamy white cheddar. If you love cheese, you'll love Macaroni by the makers of Rice-A-Roni. If you don't love cheese, well, that's just unbelievable. Try Macaroni. It's cheesy good.
Macaroni, the San Francisco treat.
When you share your food, you share your heart. So what's on your table this holiday season? Save on your festive feast at Kroger with delicious deals on all the holiday classics. Or wow the crowd with something new, like a quinoa stuffed butternut squash. It's sure to add a pop of color to your spread. How about a sweet potato casserole with a crunchy oat streusel topping, made with care for the sweet tooth and the savory tooth? With Kroger, fill your table with love and watch as your guests' hearts get as full as their bellies. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Speaking of personalities, I can't think of anyone who, obviously SCTV is a massive proving ground for Andrea Martin.
Andrea Martin, God, I love her.
She is so fucking funny whenever she is put on camera. She is incredibly funny and just really grounded. Yes, obviously SCTV pushed her to these outrageous groundlings, Second City level characters. But in here, you can see that, you know, she's just trying to be everyone's friend. And
it's a great performance.
Sadly, it doesn't help her. It doesn't help that she has the hunkiest boyfriend of anybody with the dirtiest mouth. I want to hang out with that guy. He's fucking cool. He has a fro that's larger than hers.
Canadian face right there, man.
Oh, hell yes. And unfortunately, she's given that rare, that sort of like, we don't know how she dies necessarily. I assume she also gets stabbed with the crystal unicorn, because when they're found in bed in a shot that obviously John Carpenter paid attention to, you know, she's stabbed as many times as Barb is. And I wish you know, she is, I think, of them, given the slightly shortest shrift, because she's around. She's not ever the focus of what
it's great, believable. You know, she contributes to the atmosphere of the piece by being somebody you believe and understand. You know, that's really the kind of the miracle of all of the casting, is that, you know, the movie doesn't really, other than, you know, you could argue Olivia Hussey, it doesn't really have a main character, because everybody gets so much screen time.
And if you were to follow the sort of tropes that obviously were not established yet, like Barb is presented originally as our main character. She's the one the film seems to focus the most on. She's the first person who picks up the phone. There's a lot that is focused on her, and then Jess sort of sweeps in, and naturally her storylines are so much bigger and obviously revolve around a major red herring that she becomes our lead. But it is one of those things where, because it's not formalized, because there is no pattern to copy, this plays with that form. And I think it does stuff that I wish more people would take on in modern slashers.
Yeah, I agree. Just a brief note to say that Andrea Martin on SCTV, absolutely one of the funniest people alive. Just, you know, whether it was Mrs. Talvo's Tiny Town or Purini Scleroso or whatever, just like, she is so unstoppably funny. And I know that she expressed in interviews that she was a little put out that, you know, people like Rick Moranis and John Candy and Martin Short really had much more, they had better careers. I think part of it was because they were men, and were let into, you know, the back rooms of Hollywood a little more willingly. But yeah, she deserved a career. I mean, much like Margot Kidder and Olivia Hussey, another person whose incredible talent sort of didn't save her from becoming sort of footnoted, which is a huge tragedy. She wound up in all three of those terrible My Big Fat Greek Wedding movies. And that's a certain kind of staying power, but she was really much better than that suggests.
That being said, like, she has found several additional acts that a lot of people, let's say, on the Not Ready for Primetime Players, were not afforded. She has survived.
Oh, she has.
And I think that's because her legend and her work has spoken for itself.
Yes, that's very true. And as anyone who has seen the truly dreadful Saturday Night can attest, yeah, not everybody was so lucky. God,
I have not indulged yet.
Shit, that movie was. What a fucking...
Well, from such an acclaimed director, that's hard to believe.
Speaking of Canadian film industry, that's, man, oh man, the son of Ivan Reitman, who of course directed Andrea Martin in Cannibal Girls in 1973, a movie that Eugene Levy still seems very embarrassed to have to bring up when talking about his career in interviews, now that he's once more on top of the world following the success of Schitt's Creek. But yeah, Andrea Martin, just a legend. What a true, just one of the funniest people ever.
Absolutely. I would be remiss. Obviously, we are indebted to the presence of John fucking Saxon
baby.
In this movie.
So
always nailing it. The rug in this movie, I would put in the top tier of his rugs overall.
And it's only 10 years after one of his first performances in Edgar Ulmer's amazing movie The Cavern. I believe he was the last. Him and Anne Savage, perhaps, were the last living people who have collaborated with Edgar Ulmer. They're both no longer with us, of course, but I believe he still had hair in 64.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely thinning by the time he plays a ballerina teaching pseudo-vampire in Starsky and Hutch.
Yes.
A real thing that happened that we've covered on this show.
Well, did you ever see Nightcrawler from Outer Space?
I cannot say that I have.
Hey, John Gilling, off-brand, not quite Hammer, not quite Tygon, not quite Amicus movie from 1965, an incredible movie in which an alien comes to Earth from outer space and begins making dirty phone calls to pick up and murder women. This is an incredible movie. One of the sleaziest films of the 60s. Must be seen.
Possibly a prequel to Black Christmas?
Yeah,
Maybe Unspoken?
honestly, yes. And of course,
same universe.
He was in Mario Bava's The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which was one of the earliest giallo, which this is sort of the Canadian giallo, Black Christmas. So these things all have a sort of a connective tissue, which careers like Saxons will give you. When they weren't playing people like the grinning warlord Cleel in Warrior of the Lost Planet or whatever the hell. I just love John Saxon so much. He's just so fun.
He's great. There's nothing not to like about the man. He's an absolute presence.
He's so good.
What a fantastic, actor to transverse multiple decades with. Absolutely.
Yeah, he was working almost right until the end there. And, God, he worked with everybody. It was, he was one of those people kind of like David Warner, where he would make real movies and he would make nonsense, sometimes one after the other.
But always came, game to play in whatever universe and situation he was asked to do with. And he's not a real character, but I would be remiss, because this is Kill by Kill, not to talk about Mrs. Max Taxi Driver, who... I'm only listing him here because he is dressed like a guest star on What's Happening. Gena, what the fuck is this man wearing? He is not explicitly, but implicitly telling you he's a wild and crazy guy.
Yeah, I mean, he just looks festive. It's the holiday season.
What is he festiving?
A holiday.
I'm not sure.
Any holiday.
Listen, we could talk about this movie probably for 3 more hours. Honestly, it is like, I only got to half my notes. Let's call this volume 1. We could go over this so many times. There's so much to talk about. But honestly, we'd be remiss if we didn't choose our own deathventure, and that's where we decide of the deaths we see on screen. If you were forced to die in one of those ways, which one would it be and why? Up for bid. We have asphyxiated by plastic bag. We have stabbed in the face with a metal hook. We have stabbed to death with a crystal unicorn times 2. You could have your throat slit while sitting in a police car, or you can be beaten to death with a fireplace poker. We don't know how that poor girl in the park dies. So of these on-screen deaths, Scout, you are our guest, and so that means you get to go first.
Gosh, not a lot to choose from, is there? That's all bad.
Comparatively
all bad
to a high-volume film, not necessarily, but you can't say these aren't iconic.
Oh, they're all iconic. They're all just horrible.
Yeah. Sure.
So I'm going to go with The Girl in the Park, because I prefer not knowing to how all of these poor bastards meet their end.
It doesn't look good.
Sure, I'm sure it was bad, but the fact of not
when
knowing,
everyone sees it, they are unhappy about what they've...
No, it's quite bad, but I will say, I will take that to being stabbed with a goddamn unicorn, or... beaten to death in a basement. It all just seems bad.
Yeah, that's very true. Gena, what say you?
I am going to take the unicorn because there's a certain elegance to it. And also, I'm pretty sure that Barb was so pickled by that point that she barely knew it was happening to her. So yeah. I too will take stab to death with a crystal unicorn, hopefully drunk off my ass.
Yeah, and they're so expensive looking. Look at this one. Look at that one. If you had one of these murder implements in your home, you'd be like the Queen of England or something.
Exactly.
Listen, the easiest way to go out of these is have your throat slit while sitting in a police car. But I would take 1,000 plastic bags before I align myself with the police at all, or especially in this motion picture.
Say in this town.
Oh, no. Fuck that noise. I'm not putting that on my gravestone. That is a history I do not want to be a part of. So, yeah, I am going to take asphyxiated by plastic bag over that. That's
and then you get to
my bottom
then
line.
you get to look really funny because you're like for the rest of the movie.
And I get a grave with a view. I get to look out of that window and see all of the pure white snow and everything is going on. And Billy's still talking to me. I get to be kept company. I get to hang out with a cat finally, because my wife's deathly allergic to them. So, I enjoy cats, but I don't get to hang out with them.
Cat likes you so much, doesn't even care if you're dead. Maybe
nibbles on my fingers a little bit.
Might even nibble on your face if it wasn't covered in plastic.
Right. Well, there's other vulnerable areas. I'm sure that cat will get to it eventually. That just about does it. But before we go, now, of course, we have our Patreon. We're available on socials. Rate and review us on iTunes or any other podcast platform of your choice. We all love that. Before we get into more plugs, Scout, I know you had an announcement about a movie that you wanted to make.
Indeed.
And I kind of slipped into your mentions and was like, hey, if you want a place to do that. So it'd be crazy for me not to give you a platform to do just that.
Well, I'll tell you what, and I don't know exactly when our company is making this fully public. So for all I know, you guys are getting a scoop here in time for the 40th anniversary of Reanimator. Ignite Films and Eagle Rock are collaborating to release a beautiful new 4K edition supervised by none other than producer Brian Usna. And I have been placed in charge of the accompanying 150-page booklet of essays to go with it. It's an incredible new release. And there's going to be a beautiful, beautiful new teaser that is going to drop soon. And this was the handiwork of a man named Ben Clarkson, who, if anybody in your listener community is a fan of the Blowback podcast, Ben Clarkson has done the last 2 animated promos for the Blowback podcast, and we snagged him from Brendan and Noah and got him to work with Brian on coming up with a beautiful new teaser for the Reanimator 4K that will be out next year. We put a lot of heart and soul into this. We've been working painstakingly to get the transfer right, to make sure that this is not one of those grotesque AI upscales that you see now that are just so disheartening, but rather a real piece of continuing the legacy of Reanimator and the beautiful, beautiful work of Stuart Gordon. This has been a real, just a true labor of love, and it's been so much fun. I've gotten to speak to Richard Band, the composer, who came up with the amazing, gorgeous new wave inflected score recorded with Symphony Orchestra in Rome. The theme to Reanimator, one of my favorite songs. And I spoke to Dennis Paoli, one of the screenwriters and a professor of Gothic literature, as well as the writer of movies like Stuart Gordon's Dagon, which was another film very near to Stuart's heart. So there you go. You have that to look forward to in the new year. We cannot wait to share this with people.
Excellent. Reanimator, absolutely a fantastic motion picture. And I'm even a fan of the musical.
Of course, we've spoken to the crew and writer of that. We have featurettes involving Reanimator the musical, so you can hear more about the process that went into that and Stuart's work with those guys. And they're all just so wonderful and effusive, and they all have such affection for the original movie, and that musical is a lot of fun. So we tried
a beautiful celebration, and it sounds like what you've put together and your cohorts around there put together sound really interesting. I cannot wait to lay down my money to get a copy of that.
It's going to be good. This is the 3rd Ignite DVD release. I came aboard Ignite for the release of Invaders from Mars, and was present when MoMA picked our beautiful restoration of that for their To Save and Project Festival. This is back in 2022, I want to say. And since then, we've released William Wellman's The Story of G.I. Joe. I was very fortunate. I got to do a video essay for that release that's on the disc right now. And that really came out really beautifully. But also, I've been running The Maze, which is Ignite's critical wing. And that has allowed me to give some column space to some of my favorite writers, Willow McClay, Adam Naiman, Brendan James. It's just been a lot of fun. This is the stuff that I've always liked about criticism is not, just like my own writing, who cares, but like being able to sort of shine a spotlight on people that I really love and who add productively to the conversation about film history and where it's been and where it's going. It's been a huge pleasure the last few years to be working with Ignite on this stuff and Eagle Rock. And so I'm really excited.
Fantastic. People should check that out. Gena, where can people find you on these here internets?
Well, I don't really have anything to compare to that, so.
I'm sorry, but you always go after the guests. So if they come in with a fucking barn burner, you're just going to have to follow up with what I think is some of my favorite film criticism and writing, and that is yours.
Well, thank you. I write about movies and television and general pop culture on my Substack, GenaWatchesThings.substack.com. And I am on Blue Sky under Gena Does Things.
Do it today, people. Check it out. That just about does it. But don't worry, folks. In 2025, the body count will continue. We will not be here next week, but we will see you in the new year when we talk about all sorts of good stuff. We've already lined up some fantastic guests and fun films to talk about. And of course, yes, we will talk about Nosferatu. We're doing vampires this season, so we're going to talk about it. Gena's been clamping at the bit.
I sure have.
Have you seen the new one yet?
Not yet. I have a screener. I am resisting the temptation so I can see it on the big screen.
Me too.
Well, I will reserve my judgment then. Go ahead and see it and have lots of fun.
Well, that bodes well. Anyways, that just about does it, folks. Don't worry. The body count will continue for myself, for Scout, and for Gena. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Life can throw a lot your way in the morning. You might be battling drop-off times, while your kids are battling imaginary monsters or their shoelaces. But no matter what life brings, Life cereal puts a smile on everyone's face. With 24 grams of whole grains and unexpected sweetness in every serving, it's sure to please even the pickiest eaters. Help start your mornings with Life cereal.
I really love my life.